The massive doors of Galactic Council Station Alpha slid open with a soft hiss. All eyes turned to watch the newcomer step through the entrance. James Mason, Earth's first official diplomat to the stars, paused at the threshold, taking in the scene before him. The Grand Council chamber stretched before him, filled with beings from across the galaxy. Some floated in bubbling tanks, others perched on specially designed seats. Many stood on multiple legs or hovered above the ground. Their skin ranged from scaled to feathered to translucent. The air filled with a mix of whispers and clicks as they noticed him. Then came the laughter. "Is that really the Deathworlder?" A tall, elegant alien with silvery skin asked loud enough for all to hear. "It looks so soft." More laughter rippled through the chamber. James kept his face neutral as he walked forward. He had been warned this might happen. Humans came from what the galactic community called a death world, a planet with gravity, weather, and wildlife so extreme that most species couldn't survive there for more than a few hours. Instead of earning respect, this label had made most aliens view humans as primitive brutes who had somehow stumbled into space travel. Admiral Vorix, the blue-skinned station commander, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. His upper eye ridges twitched with what James recognized as distaste. "Earth Representative Mason," Vorix said stiffly, "the Council acknowledges your arrival." "Not welcomes. Acknowledges." James nodded politely anyway. "Thank you, Admiral. Earth is honored to join the galactic community." This prompted more snickering from the delegates. A small bird-like creature with glittering feathers leaned toward its neighbor. Did they teach it to speak just for this meeting? It chirped loudly. James pretended not to hear. He had been chosen for this mission specifically for his calm temperament. 6 months of diplomatic training had prepared him for almost any insult. "Your accommodation has been arranged," continued Vorix, gesturing to a small green alien who stood nearby. "Tep will show you to your quarters." James followed Tep through winding corridors, aware of curious and dismissive glances from passing aliens. The station was a marvel of engineering. A massive spinning wheel in space housing representatives from over 200 worlds. Everywhere he looked, advanced technology seamlessly blended with artistic beauty. "Here," Tep said finally, stopping at a door far from the main halls. "Your room." The door slid open to reveal a small plain chamber. It contained only a bed, a desk, and what appeared to be very basic facilities. James had been expecting this too. The lowest-ranked representatives always received the smallest quarters. "Thank you," James said sincerely. Tep looked surprised at his politeness. "The first general session begins tomorrow at Station Rotation 7, Tep informed him before quickly walking away. James closed the door and set down his small travel bag. He walked to the single window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, counting on him to establish humanity's place among these advanced civilizations. He took a deep breath and smiled slightly. They thought humans were just dumb brutes from a harsh world. They expected him to be clumsy, stupid, and quick to anger. Their low expectations would be his greatest advantage. James unpacked his few belongings and reviewed his notes for tomorrow's meeting. The path ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. Let them laugh now. He had a feeling they wouldn't be laughing for long. The council chamber buzzed with activity as James entered for his first official meeting. He wore the simple dark blue uniform of Earth's Space Diplomatic Corps, standing out among the colorful robes and exoskeletons of the alien delegates. "The human is on time. How surprising," remarked a tall, thin alien with purple skin to its companions. "Perhaps they do have some concept of civilized behavior after all." James took his assigned seat at a small desk marked with Earth's symbol. It was positioned far from the central speaking area, next to the newly admitted species from minor worlds. The message was clear. Earth was not considered important. Admiral Vorix called the meeting to order. "Today we welcome new representatives to our galactic community. They will observe our proceedings and learn our ways." The meeting began with reports from various sectors. James listened carefully, making notes on his tablet. When a debate arose about trade routes near Earth's solar system, he raised his hand to speak as protocol required. The chamber fell silent. Many delegates leaned forward, curious to hear what the Deathworlder might say. Earth Representative Vorx acknowledged reluctantly. "You may address the council for 2 minutes." James stood. "Thank you, Admiral. While Earth is new to galactic politics, we are not new to commerce. The proposed route through the Orion Arm passes through a stellar nursery. Our scientists have observed that the radiation in that region could damage certain types of shield technology. I've prepared data that might be useful in planning safer alternatives." He transmitted the information to the central system. The chamber remained quiet as delegates reviewed his data. "This is accurate analysis," admitted a squat, green alien with multiple eyes. "How did your world obtain this information without deep space capabilities?" "We've been studying the stars for thousands of years," James explained. "Our planet's harsh conditions encouraged us to look upward for hope." After the meeting, James found himself approached by a small group of delegates during the refreshment period. They circled him like curious predators. "Tell us, human," said a delegate named Grax, whose species resembled large insects. "Is it true your planet has areas where the ground itself moves and breaks apart?" "You mean earthquakes?" "Yes, tectonic activity is common on Earth." "And you build your dwellings on this unstable ground?" asked another, clearly amused. "How primitive." "We've developed architecture that can withstand most seismic events," James replied calmly. "Adaptation is a human specialty." A delegate with flowing tentacles for arms laughed. "I heard humans need to shut down their consciousness for hours each day or they cease functioning." "Is this true?" "We call it sleep. And yes, we require it," James acknowledged. "How inefficient. No wonder your species has achieved so little," the delegate said, triggering more laughter. From across the room, a slender alien with iridescent scales watched the exchange with interest. This was Lyra, a scientist from the Araxian species. Unlike the others, she observed the human with analytical curiosity rather than mockery. When James skillfully deflected another insulting question about human biology, Lyra noted how his responses remained diplomatic while conveying surprising depth of knowledge. Later, as James left the chamber, Lyra approached him in the corridor. "Earth Representative," she said softly, "I found your contributions today unexpected." James smiled. "In what way, Delegate Lyra?" "Most new species stumble through their first council session. You navigated it with unusual skill for." She hesitated. "For a primitive Deathworlder." James finished for her. Lyra's scales shifted color slightly, her species equivalent of embarrassment. "I meant no offense." "None taken. Assumptions are natural when meeting new life forms." "Perhaps," Lyra replied thoughtfully. "Some of our assumptions about Earth require reconsideration." As they parted ways, James knew he had made at least one potential ally. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The third day of council meetings started like the others. James took his seat at the back of the chamber, nodding politely to the few delegates who acknowledged him. Most still pretended not to see him. Admiral Vorx called the session to order, but before the regular business could begin, a delegate rose from his seat. Commander Krell of the Drax Imperium stood tall, his gray metallic skin catching the light as he moved to the center floor. The Drax were known throughout the galaxy as skilled warriors and ruthless negotiators. "I request to address the council on an urgent matter," Krell announced, his deep voice silencing all chatter in the room. "Proceed, Commander," Vorx replied. Krell turned slowly, making eye contact with delegates around the room before fixing his gaze on James. "The Drax Imperium questions the wisdom of allowing a Deathworld species full council representation," he stated. "Humans have barely mastered basic interstellar travel. Their inclusion diminishes the standing of this august body." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. James remained still, his face calm despite the attack. "What do you propose, Commander?" asked Vorex, looking almost pleased at this development. A series of trials, Krell declared, to prove the human worthy of sitting among us. If their representative fails, Earth will be classified as a protectorate rather than a full member world. The chamber erupted in excited discussion. A protectorate classification would allow other species to claim Earth's resources for management and protection. It was colonization by another name. Admiral Vorex raised his hand for quiet. This is an unusual request, but not without precedent. The Council will vote. James watched as nearly every hand in the room rose in favor of Krell's proposal. Only Lyra and 2 other delegates abstained. Earth Representative, Vorex said, turning to James. Do you accept this challenge on behalf of your world? James stood slowly. The room fell silent, many delegates leaning forward with anticipation. Admiral, Commander Krell, honored delegates, James began. Earth understands that, as newcomers, we must earn our place. We accept these trials. Krell's expression hardened. He had clearly expected James to refuse or protest. The trials will test 4 areas, Krell continued. Intelligence, diplomatic skill, physical endurance, and strategic thinking, each designed to reveal the true capacity of your species. I understand, James replied. When do we begin? Tomorrow, Krell snapped. The Council will observe each trial. Prepare yourself, human. As the meeting adjourned, delegates clustered in excited groups, already placing wagers on how quickly the human would fail. James gathered his materials calmly, aware of the many eyes watching him. Lyra approached as he was leaving. That was a setup, she said quietly. The Dracs never act without planning every move. I suspected as much, James replied. The trials will be designed for you to fail, she warned. The Dracs have studied human physiology. They know your weaknesses. James nodded. And what do you think, Delegate Lyra? Will I fail? Lyra's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue color. 2 days ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, she paused. I'm no longer certain. That's progress, James said with a small smile. As he walked back to his quarters, James contacted Earth with the news. His superiors weren't surprised. We anticipated something like this, said the voice from Earth Command. Remember your training, James. They see our world as nothing but storms, predators, and disasters. Yes, James replied. They don't understand that surviving the Deathworld means we've already passed the hardest trial of all. He spent the night preparing, knowing that tomorrow would determine not just his fate, but Earth's place among the stars. The first trial began in a circular chamber filled with observing delegates. Commander Krell stood at the center, a satisfied smile on his face. The intelligence trial will test the human's problem-solving abilities, he announced. A puzzle that even young Dracs can solve. James was led to a table where a complex 3-dimensional puzzle sat. It consisted of interlocking metal pieces that formed a sphere when properly assembled. According to the rules, he had 1 hour to solve it. Many species require days to complete this. Krell noted loudly to the audience. Let us see how the Deathworlder manages. James studied the puzzle carefully, turning it in his hands. The delegates watched, some already looking bored, expecting a long wait before his inevitable failure. 20 minutes later, James clicked the final piece into place. Silence fell across the chamber. Krell's smile vanished. How did you? He began, then stopped himself. The human got lucky. The physical trial will be more revealing. The physical challenge took place in a large simulation room. James was required to cross an obstacle course, while the gravity and atmosphere constantly changed. At times, the gravity increased to twice Earth's normal pull. Other sections had almost no oxygen. Even if he completes it, a delegate whispered to another, he'll be too exhausted for the remaining trials. James removed his formal jacket and began. The audience watched as he methodically worked through each obstacle. When gravity increased, he adjusted his movements to conserve energy. In low oxygen zones, he controlled his breathing with practiced precision. "Look at his technique," Lyra commented to a fellow scientist. "He's using environmental challenges to his advantage." When James reached a climbing wall with triple gravity, many delegates leaned forward, expecting him to fail. Instead, he studied the wall briefly, then used a different approach than expected, climbing diagonally rather than straight up, using momentum to overcome the crushing gravity. He completed the course with 10 minutes to spare, breathing hard, but still standing tall. "Impossible," muttered Krell. The diplomatic trial came next. James faced a panel of delegates who presented him with a complex border dispute between three fictional worlds. The scenario had been designed with no clear solution. How would Earth resolve this conflict? Asked Admiral Vorex. James studied the information, then began outlining an approach that surprised everyone. Rather than choosing sides, he identified shared resources that would benefit all three parties and proposed a joint development zone. "This is not how the scenario was meant to be solved," complained one delegate. Yet his solution would prevent war while benefiting all parties, countered Lyra. "Is that not the purpose of diplomacy?" The final trial, strategic thinking, took place on a holographic battlefield. James was given command of a small fleet facing overwhelming enemy forces. The objective was to protect a civilian transport. The audience watched as James deployed his ships in what seemed like a foolish pattern. Krell laughed openly. "The human sacrifices his strongest vessels with no purpose," he said. "This will end quickly." But as the simulation progressed, James's strategy revealed itself. He had used his stronger ships as bait, drawing enemy forces into a nebula where their sensors malfunctioned. His remaining ships rescued the transport while the enemy searched in confusion. When the simulation ended in victory, the chamber fell silent again. Lyra studied James with new respect. "Your approach to problems is unconventional," she said. James shrugged. "On Earth, those who think conventionally often don't survive. Our harsh world teaches flexibility." Later, in her private quarters, Lyra accessed the station's database and began researching Earth in earnest. What she found made her scales turn pale. The planet humans called home wasn't just difficult. It was a crucible that forged its inhabitants through constant challenge. "They don't just survive there," she whispered to herself. "They thrive there." The council chamber erupted in heated debate. James sat quietly, watching the delegates argue about his unexpected success in the trials. Commander Krell demanded additional challenges, while others insisted the human had proven his worth. The trials were completed according to the agreed terms. Admiral Vorex stated, looking displeased at having to defend James. "We must honor." A deafening alarm cut through the chamber, silencing all debate. Red emergency lights pulsed along the walls. "Station alert. Section 7 life support critical failure," announced an automated voice. Emergency protocols activated. Panic swept through the room. Section 7 housed over 300 station residents, including many diplomatic staff. Admiral Vorex rushed to a communication panel. "Report." A frantic voice responded. "Cascade failure in the environmental systems, sir. Oxygen levels dropping rapidly. Temperature falling. Estimated time until fatal conditions, 20 minutes. Evacuate immediately," ordered Vorex. "Unable to complete evacuation in time, sir. Internal damage has sealed emergency bulkheads. We're attempting to override, but systems are not responding." Delegates began shouting suggestions and demands simultaneously. Some rushed from the chamber to secure their own quarters. Others simply froze in terror. James stood up. Having spent the past days studying station schematics as part of his preparation, he had an idea. He approached Vorex, who was desperately trying to coordinate a response. "Admiral," James said firmly, "I can help." Vorex turned, his expression shifting from panic to skepticism. "This is not the time for human interference. I've studied your life support systems. They're similar to those we use in our deep-sea habitats on Earth. I know a manual bypass procedure." Vorex hesitated. Lives were at stake, but trusting a Deathworlder. "Admiral, we're losing time," James pressed. "Very well," Vorex conceded, "but you'll need protective gear. The conditions in Section 7 are already becoming hostile." "For you, perhaps," James replied. "For a human from Earth, they're just uncomfortable." Before Vorex could protest, James was moving. He gathered basic tools and emergency equipment, then headed toward Section 7. To his surprise, Lyra fell into step beside him. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Assisting," she replied. "My species has experience with complex systems integration. Besides, someone should document what you're about to attempt." They reached the sealed bulkhead separating them from the affected section. The status panel showed rapidly deteriorating conditions beyond. Temperature now -15 degrees, oxygen at 17% and falling. "You cannot survive in there," warned a station security officer. James removed his formal jacket. "Humans have walked on the surface of Antarctica in worse conditions. This is manageable." He operated the manual override on the bulkhead. The door slid open, releasing a blast of freezing air. Lyra stepped back involuntarily, her scales darkening in distress. "Stay here," James told her. "Guide me through the comms." He stepped through the doorway. Inside, emergency lights cast eerie blue shadows across the corridor. His breath clouded before him, but he moved with purpose. Through his earpiece, Lyra directed him toward the main environmental control hub. James found the access panel and began working. His fingers grew numb in the cold, but he kept going. He had grown up in northern regions on Earth, where winter temperatures regularly dropped far lower than this. "Status update," came Vorex's voice through the comm. "Accessing primary systems now," James replied, his voice steady despite the cold. "The problem is a cascade failure in the atmospheric recyclers. I can reroute through secondary systems." As he worked, James noticed a small group of station residents huddled in a common area, wrapped in emergency blankets. Their eyes widened at the sight of a human moving efficiently through conditions that had them nearly immobilized. "Almost there," James said, making final connections in the bypass circuit. "Lyra, tell environmental control to initiate restart sequence on my mark." Behind him, one of the watching aliens whispered to another, "The Deathworlder is saving us." The lights flickered, then stabilized. A gentle hum indicated systems coming back online. "Temperature stabilizing," reported Lyra through the comm. "Oxygen levels rising." In the command center, Admiral Vorex watched the life support readings return to normal ranges. For the first time, he looked at the human's homeworld designation on his screen with something other than disdain. The council chamber looked different today. James noticed it immediately as he entered. No one laughed. No one whispered behind their hands. Instead, heads turned toward him with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect. Admiral Vorex stood at the center of the chamber, his posture notably straighter than during previous sessions. "This emergency meeting of the Galactic Council will now begin," he announced. "Our first order of business concerns the events in Section 7. James took his seat, surprised to find it had been moved. No longer relegated to the back of the room, his position was now among the middle-tier delegations, a silent acknowledgement of changed status. "Representative Mason," Vorex called, using James's title properly for the first time. "Please join me at the center." James walked forward, aware of all eyes following his movement. "The council has reviewed the incident reports," Vorex stated formally. "Your actions saved 327 lives. The quick restoration of life support systems prevented catastrophic damage to the station itself." A murmur of approval rippled through the delegates. "Earth has demonstrated qualities we did not anticipate," Vorex continued. "Therefore, this council formally recognizes humanity's full membership status, with all rights and privileges thereof." The announcement was met with applause, tentative at first, then growing stronger. James nodded in acknowledgement, maintaining diplomatic composure despite his internal satisfaction. As the formal session ended, something unprecedented occurred. Delegates approached James rather than avoiding him. Representative Mason, said a tall, elegant alien with crystalline features. The Luminary Confederation would be honored to discuss exclusive trade routes with Earth. Before James could respond, another delegate moved forward. The Talarian Network offers military exchange programs. Your species' adaptability would benefit our defense forces greatly. More delegates gathered around, each offering alliances and opportunities that would have been unthinkable days earlier. James handled each approach diplomatically, making no firm commitments but closing no doors. From across the room, Commander Krell watched with narrowed eyes. The Drax commander approached slowly when the crowd around James thinned. "Human," he said stiffly. "The Drax Imperium acknowledges your capabilities." Coming from the Drax, this was tantamount to high praise. "Thank you, Commander," James replied. "Earth looks forward to peaceful relations with the Imperium." Krell gave a short nod before turning away. James noticed the commander's posture had changed. There was a new wariness in how he carried himself around the human. Later that evening, a special reception was held to formalize Earth's status. James entered wearing his full diplomatic uniform, now adorned with the official Galactic Council insignia. Lyra approached, her scales shimmering with excited colors. "I've completed my research on Earth," she said, "and presented my findings to the Science Council." "What conclusions did you reach?" James asked. "That Deathworld is a misnomer," she replied. "Your planet isn't a place of death, it's a forge. The conditions that we thought would create only brutish survivors instead produced innovation, adaptability, and remarkable resilience." "That's an interesting perspective," James said. "My research has been approved for a special presentation tomorrow," Lyra continued. "I'm proposing a new classification for worlds like Earth, crucible planets, places where environmental pressures accelerate both biological and cultural evolution." Admiral Vorex approached them, holding a data tablet. "Representative Mason," he said formally, "I've received 17 requests from member worlds seeking Earth ambassadors." James raised an eyebrow. 17. "Yes," Vorex confirmed, looking slightly uncomfortable, "including a request from my own homeworld." As the reception continued, James noticed a fundamental shift in how the delegates interacted with him. No longer was he viewed as a curiosity or an inferior. Now they watched him with calculation, measuring what alliance with Earth might offer them. In one corner, James overheard two delegates speaking quietly. "The humans saved hundreds without protection in conditions that would kill most of us. If that's what one human can do, imagine what their world could offer in alliance." James smiled slightly as he accepted another diplomatic greeting. Earth's position had transformed from an object of ridicule to a valuable potential ally in less than a week, and he hadn't even revealed humanity's true capabilities yet. The docking bay of Galactic Council Station Alpha bustled with activity. Delegates from dozens of worlds gathered to witness an event none had anticipated when the human first arrived: a formal departure ceremony for Earth's representative. James stood near his small diplomatic vessel, now adorned with the newly created Earth Galactic Alliance emblem. In 1 week, he had transformed humanity's standing from laughable newcomers to sought-after allies. Admiral Vorex approached, wearing his full ceremonial uniform with all decorations displayed. Behind him walked a procession of senior delegates, including Commander Krell of the Drax and Lyra of the Araxians. "Representative Mason," Vorex began, his voice carrying through the docking bay. "The Galactic Council presents you with the formal treaties approved unanimously this morning." He handed James a crystal data core containing agreements that would open the stars to humanity. Trade routes, technology exchanges, mutual defense pacts, all had been negotiated in a whirlwind of diplomatic activity following the Section 7 crisis. "Earth thanks the Council for its wisdom and friendship," James replied, following the formal protocol he had studied so carefully before this mission. What happened next broke from all protocol. Admiral Vorex stepped forward, and placed his hand on his chest in a gesture that everyone recognized. The personal pledge of honor, never offered lightly and certainly never to a species so recently admitted to the Council. James Mason of Earth, Vorex said, using his personal name rather than his title, "I pledge my personal support for Earth's integration into galactic society. My house stands with yours." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. Such a pledge from the station commander was unprecedented. Then Commander Krell stepped forward. The imposing Drax warrior stood silent for a moment, his metallic skin gleaming under the bay lights. Then, with deliberate movements, he performed the Drax military salute, right fist to left shoulder, head bowed briefly. "The Drax Imperium recognizes Earth as a worthy power," Krell stated formally. "We do not offer friendship easily. Consider this the beginning of respect." Coming from the militaristic Drax, this was essentially a declaration that Earth was now considered a major power to be reckoned with. One by one, representatives from key worlds offered their own gestures of recognition. What had begun as a simple departure ceremony had transformed into something far more significant, a realignment of galactic politics with Earth suddenly positioned at the center. Lyra was the last to approach. "The Science Council has approved my recommendation," she said. "Earth is officially reclassified from Deathworld to Crucible World, the first of a new category in our stellar classifications." She handed James a small device. "This contains my complete research on Earth and human adaptability. I believe it will help other worlds better understand your species." "Thank you, Lyra," James said sincerely. "Your friendship has meant a great deal." As James prepared to board his vessel, Admiral Vorex made one final announcement. "The Council has received formal requests from 29 worlds seeking human ambassadors. Additionally, 6 major trading houses have requested Earth representatives for their governing boards." James nodded acknowledgement of this information, maintaining his diplomatic composure despite his internal amazement at how completely the situation had changed. He turned to board his ship, then paused to look back at the assembled delegates. The same chamber that had echoed with mockery at his arrival now stood in respectful silence. Some delegates even bowed their heads as he made eye contact with them. No speeches were needed. No grand declarations. The transformation spoke for itself. The Deathworlder who had arrived to laughter was departing with the respect, perhaps even the beginning of loyalty, of the galaxy's most powerful species. As his ship's engines powered up, James allowed himself a small smile. Earth had taken its first true step into the galactic community, not through force or intimidation, but through resilience, adaptability, and quiet strength. The qualities forged on a world that the galaxy had mistakenly labeled as merely deadly, rather than recognizing it as something far more powerful, a crucible for greatness.